So another impromptu with Fed printing money, FIS flows were coming back into India. You could see the stock markets rising as well. Then there were 2 or 3 new products being coined since there was so much of free money and there were not that many investable assets to invest out there. Otherwise, the values would be so inflated that one could easily make out that these are inflated assets. So they had to create some new products. So crypto gained popularity, NFT started gaining popularity, and the new term startups gained huge popularity. So during that time, in every news read, you could read that 1 or 2 startups are getting formed daily across sectors. And after a few months down the line, you could see that the new term was, being made famous, named unicorn. That so and so startups, so and so startup had reached the unicorn status, and there was a horde, there was a rush among all these startups, to be the unicorn. And so it was a very, careful game being planned out by the PEs and VCs, wherein although the PE funding was a bit like you can call it a blind financing, wherein it is almost unsecured since they would be investing around 70 to 80% in the common stock of the startups and only 20% would be through debt. But they had planned it so well that they could get an exit option either through the secondary private market, or they would be finding a strategic buyer or a leveraged buyout PE firm for an exit. And if not the case, they used to exercise in certain share agreements the put option, wherein it is basically like a buyback option wherein the startup has to buy back the shares provided he has sufficient cash flows. So yeah, and eventually, luckily, SEBI also amended the rules for loss-making startups wherein they were being allowed to raise IPOs. The only difference was that retail participation was being restricted to 10% in the loss-making startups, as it is 35% case of profit-making startups. So yeah, the risk was mitigated to some extent, but not wholly, as in even the QIB's subscription would be a lot more, but since there is no a fixed lock-in period for the QIBs, they could dump their shares very easily on the retail participants, and eventually the retail participants could be holding the major portion of shares of these startups. You never know. So yeah, so a new exit route was being found out by these PE firms through IPO. They eventually, COVID situation improved a lot. The few SMEs who survived were back on its track. And the good change that startup brought was that every retail corner mostly has now got its own QR code, and they even accept payment wallets, UPI, etc. So yeah, so that was a good change being brought onto the retail participant base, majorly by the startups, since almost all countries are dependent on import of the crude oil and natural gas, India being one of them as well. So any external shocks in the macro data can alter all the basic fundamentals of all the other sectors. So looking at the crude prices now, and they seem to be they could hold on it so at least for around a year or so. They could be on a highly inflated levels. So definitely the other sectors will suffer, and there could be a mild recession not only in India but in many of the countries. So looking at that, I think that the PE firms would be in a bit of jittery position, and they would be looking to take out their capital and invest in US once again, take back the capital to the home country once again. And now the PE firms wouldn't find any alternative to sign an exit option, because IPO is not a feasible option at this time. No one would subscribe to it. So that's the reason why you could see that SoftBank, Tiger Global have been booking losses on the investments now. So the party at least temporarily seems to have been paused, the funding party, and that's the reason why you could see that since startups are highly dependent on the funding, external funding, and now since there is no funding, the only reason for it to conserve cash and to pay for the next purchase order would be to reduce the employees at the cost of the top line, definitely. So they're willing to sacrifice the top line, but they have to reduce the employees for the next purchase order. And that's the reason why you could see that every other day now, at least for past 1 or 2 months, you could see that almost all the startups across the globe have been firing employees, not in tens, not in hundreds, but in thousands. And once you start firing employees in thousands, every startup, so it means that it is not at all related to your performance. It comes down to your own business skills, business acumen, and you at least you have to take the responsibility for it. And now there is a new, fashionable quote being termed like winter is coming. So it is a famous quote from Game of Thrones, and it is normally being used when when something bad is about to happen. And normally winters are in December, but for these guys I guess it seems to be in June. I don't know how, but still they are finding some of the other escape route, to straight off the responsibility, thinking that these are external environments. But I'm very sure that the well-established firms and even in SMEs to a certain extent, you go through these economic down cycles, macroeconomic down cycles, once in 3 years or 4 years, they would be managing it properly, because their actual business is being run on proper cash flows, not like this, who are based on the fundings. And if the fundings get restricted, I wonder how are they going to sustain the top line. And since the entire business model of them is based on discounts, and since there's no funding as well, to go the discounts, to give the discounts, so it could lead to loss of customers as well, and eventually it could lead to closing down of businesses. The entire blame actually should lie on to these P and VC firms, who has created such kind of mindset in the first stage entrepreneurs. These are basically first generation entrepreneurs itself, who have started the startup in 2 or 3 years back. They have no prior, most of them wouldn't be having prior experience how to run a business, so they have just been given the targets, sale targets. You have to grow at this sales, so your company will be valued at this much of the sales multiples, and this is how the business is run. And on that approach itself they are running their businesses, which is a pretty screwed approach. Few internet companies, few internet startups which got listed this year or last year, you could see the valuation has come down more than half, and still they are operating on the same model. Even though they are listed, they have not changed the operating model, that now the profitability will be given importance to. Still they are going after the top line. And I wonder how, once you are listed, I wonder how they will be raising the next round. Through rights issue, I don't think at this bottom prices anyone would be willing to go for the rights issue, subscribe to the rights issue. FPO is not possible. FPO is looking very hard as well if your share prices are down to such an extent. And even if the situation normalizes in a year or so, I'm quite sure that again the same funding game will start. Again the FPIs will flow down to India, and again the thing will start. So it is always better to work in well established firms, although they pay. That is what I always prefer to do. Although they don't pay you as astronomically as the startups do, but at least there is security of the jobs. And coming to the new labor code which is about to get implemented, so there should be few clauses out here that one can the startups can guarantee the employees who are willing to work with them a fixed term period of say 3 to 5 years. So whenever they will be thinking of the next hiring, they will be thinking they'll be carefully planning it out and not just haphazardly taking any decision. There should be more accountability placed on the startups and these VCs.